It was just another ordinary afternoon when I pulled up to the gas station. I had just finished a long shift and was looking forward to getting home, resting, and catching up on sleep. I'm no stranger to the stares, the glances that seem to follow me wherever I go, but it's always something I've learned to ignore. I've worn this uniform for years, with pride, and nothing's going to shake that. As I pulled into the parking spot, I noticed the 2 police cruisers parked near the entrance. I didn't think much of it, figuring they were just refueling, maybe grabbing a coffee. But as I got out of the car, one of the officers locked eyes with me, and the feeling in my gut tightened. I shrugged it off. I'm just here to grab a drink, I told myself. I made my way toward the store entrance, but the officer was already walking toward me. His approach was deliberate, and I could tell something wasn't right. "Ma'am, can I have a word?" he said, his voice a bit too sharp. "Of course," I replied, trying to remain calm. He looked me up and down, then motioned for me to step aside. My instincts told me something wasn't right, but I stayed composed. "I'm afraid I'm going to need to ask you to step over here," he said. The officer's eyes darted to the other cop, standing off to the side. His posture was stiff, almost like he was bracing for something. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. I wasn't about to be intimidated, not today. The officer motioned for me to step aside, and I could feel the weight of the situation settling in. My body tensed, but I stayed calm. I had been through situations like this before, police making unnecessary assumptions based on my appearance or what they thought they knew about me. This wasn't the first time I'd felt singled out, but it sure felt different this time. "Is there a problem, officer?" I asked, keeping my tone polite, yet firm. "We've had some reports about someone matching your description acting suspiciously," he said, his eyes narrowing. "You'll need to wait here while we check things out." I glanced at the second officer, who hadn't said a word but was watching me closely, like a hawk. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what was going on. Suspicious? Me? I was in full uniform, wearing the same gear I wore every day to serve my country. But I knew better than to engage in an argument right now. The more I stayed calm, the more it would confuse them. They were out of their depth, and I could tell. I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket, and I glanced at it. It was a call from my supervisor, a number I couldn't afford to ignore. I raised my hand slightly, signaling that I needed to take the call. "Please, excuse me for a moment," I said, and without waiting for a response, I answered. "Yes, sir," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is everything all right?" my supervisor asked, his tone urgent. "Well, not really," I said quietly, giving him a brief rundown of the situation. "You know what to do," he said, cutting me off before I could explain further. "I'll handle it. Stay calm. They won't know what hit them." I hung up, and I could feel the air around me shift. I wasn't in this alone anymore. As I stood there, phone still in hand, I watched the officers exchange a look. The one who had initially approached me seemed unsettled, his eyes darting between me and his partner. I knew something was about to change. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My supervisor had made his call, and that was all that mattered now. The first officer stepped a little closer, still keeping his hand on his radio, his fingers twitching like he was ready to escalate the situation at any moment. "Are you going to cooperate with us, ma'am?" he asked again, this time with less certainty in his voice. I took a deep breath. "I've cooperated fully," I said, my voice steady. "But you might want to check your sources. I'm not the person you think I am." The second officer, who had remained quiet so far, spoke up, his voice laced with hesitation. "We're just following procedures, ma'am. You know how it is." He looked to his partner for reassurance, but there was a crack in his confidence now. That's when it happened. The radio crackled to life in the officer's hand. His face paled as the dispatcher's voice came through, clear and sharp. Unit 12, stop what you're doing. Disregard the suspect. She's in uniform, and it's confirmed, she's on duty. Her identification checks out. Over. The officer froze, staring at the radio as if it might explode. His partner's face turned red with frustration. What the hell? The second officer muttered under his breath. The tension in the air was thick, and I could see the shift in their demeanor. They had been ready to take things further, but now their world had just come crashing down. They hadn't expected me to be who I was. The first officer cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, I apologize for the misunderstanding," he said, his voice unconvincing. I didn't respond immediately. I just stood there, letting the silence speak for itself. Then, I pulled out my phone again. My supervisor's voice came through loud and clear as I read the text he'd just sent. "They're done," it said. "I'll take care of it. Their careers are over." I could feel the tension in my chest ease. My supervisor had already made sure they understood just how serious this situation was. The air around us felt suffocating now, thick with unspoken words. The officers stood in front of me, both of them visibly shaken, not sure what to say next. I didn't need to say a word. They knew, deep down, that this wasn't going to end quietly. They had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from it. The first officer, still trying to recover from his mistake, fumbled with his radio. His hand was shaking slightly as he keyed the mic. Unit 12, 10-4. "We're clear here." Over. But I wasn't done. "Not yet. Do you know who I am?" I asked, my voice cool, almost detached. "Because I'm sure you didn't think this through." The second officer's eyes widened, and for the first time, he looked nervous. We thought you were someone else," he stammered, his previous confidence completely gone. "Really?" I said, stepping closer to them, making my presence known. "You thought I was someone else. And this is how you chose to handle it." The first officer opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "No," I said firmly. "This isn't about a mistake anymore. You've messed with the wrong person. You thought I wouldn't speak up. But trust me, I'm not walking away from this." I didn't need to explain myself any further. They could see it in my eyes, the finality in my stance. My supervisor had already taken care of the rest, and I knew that their careers, their reputations, were about to be shattered. I reached for my phone one more time, typing out a quick message to my supervisor. "It's done. They know." The first officer's face had turned pale, almost ghostly. "We're sorry, ma'am," he muttered, looking anywhere but at me. "We didn't mean for this to go this far." But it was too late for apologies. I could see the fear in their eyes now. They had underestimated me, assumed they could handle this however they liked. But their mistake was in assuming that I would just let it slide. I wasn't going to let it slide. Not this time. "Consider this a warning," I said quietly, turning to walk away. "Next time, make sure you know who you're dealing with." As I walked back to my car, I could feel the eyes of everyone in the gas station on me. The officers didn't follow me. They stood frozen, their fate sealed. The message had been clear, I wasn't just another person to mess with. And this time, there was no getting out of it. I slid into the driver's seat of my car, the weight of everything sinking in as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life, but the noise felt distant, almost muffled, like I was in a different world entirely. The gas station, the officers, everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. As I backed out of the parking spot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The two officers stood there, still frozen in place, their gazes locked on me. The second officer was already fumbling with his phone, likely trying to figure out how to explain what had just happened. I couldn't help but let out a small breath of relief. They hadn't just made a mistake. They had miscalculated the consequences, assumed they could intimidate or push me around without any real repercussions. But now, as I drove away, I felt something else growing inside me, a sense of empowerment, of justice served. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew they wouldn't forget this. Neither would I. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was my supervisor, texting, "It's done. I've made sure their records are flagged. They'll be lucky to stay on the force after this. You're safe now. I'll take care of the rest." I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Everything had been set in motion. Their careers were hanging by a thread, and there was no going back. What had started as a routine stop had now escalated to a situation they weren't prepared for. As I drove down the road, the feeling of being watched lingered. Not just by the officers, but by the entire world around me. People like them, they didn't understand what it was like to face constant scrutiny. But I did. And I knew how to fight back. By the time I reached home, the sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows over the streets. But in that moment, I felt lighter. The weight of what had happened, what had been said and done, had already begun to shift in my mind. And as I pulled into my driveway, I realized I wasn't just driving away from a bad situation, I was driving towards something new. Something better. As I stepped out of my car, the cool evening air hit me, a reminder that things had changed. The events of the day replayed in my mind, and with each passing second, I felt more certain that this was only the beginning. It wasn't just about those officers anymore. It was about making a stand, drawing a line in the sand. I walked into my house, the familiar warmth of home settling over me. I knew that I needed to rest, but my mind was racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play now. The system had just been challenged, and my actions had sent a message. It wasn't just the officers who had to face the consequences, this was a moment that would ripple through the force, through the community, and beyond. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert. I opened the notification, and my eyes scanned the headline, "2 officers under investigation after misidentifying officer in uniform, careers in jeopardy." I stared at the screen for a moment, the words sinking in. It was already out there. The fallout had begun. But I knew that this wouldn't be the end of the story. They wouldn't just fade away quietly. There would be hearings, questions, investigations. And somewhere in the middle of all that, the real issue would be exposed, the way they had assumed control, the way they had treated me as an inconvenience instead of someone worthy of respect. I sat down on the couch, breathing deeply. My supervisor's text message popped up again, and I opened it. "You did the right thing today. The department will be handling things from here, but I'll make sure your report is added to the record. This isn't over, but you've made sure it's starting the right way." A small smile tugged at my lips. I had done what needed to be done, and it had been enough to start the change. But the work wasn't over yet. I couldn't rest on this victory, not when so many others were still in positions of power, unchecked, unaware that things were shifting beneath their feet. I pulled out my phone and quickly composed a message. It was time to take the next step. "I'll be ready when it's time to speak up. You know where to find me." I sent it off, feeling the weight of my words. Tomorrow, the world would be watching, and I would be ready. The next morning, the world didn't feel quite as calm as it usually did. News outlets were already picking up the story, and my phone kept buzzing with alerts, texts, and notifications. The headline was everywhere: "Officers detain officer in uniform, careers on the line after mistaken identity." It wasn't just local news anymore. It was national, trending across multiple platforms. The officers' faces were plastered all over social media, and their fate seemed sealed, but I knew the real story hadn't even fully unfolded yet. I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee, watching the frenzy. The media was painting a picture of 2 cops making a mistake, but they weren't telling the whole truth. They weren't addressing the systemic issues that led to this. They weren't talking about the countless people who faced the same kind of treatment, day in and day out, without ever getting the chance to make a difference. As I scrolled through my phone, I saw a message from my supervisor: "It's going to get loud from here on out. The department's already in damage control. But you need to be prepared for the next steps. They'll try to turn this into something else. Stay sharp." I knew exactly what he meant. When things like this happen, the powers that be always try to shift the narrative. They'll try to make it about the officer's mistakes, or about me overreacting. But I wasn't just some person off the street. I was in uniform too, just like them, and I deserved respect just as much. I could already hear the whispers starting. Was it a misunderstanding? Were the officers just doing their job? Was the situation blown out of proportion? The narrative was being shaped, but I wasn't going to let it slip by unnoticed. The phone rang, and I saw my supervisor's name flash on the screen. "Hello. I need you to come down to the station. It's time to make your statement. And we need you to stand firm. This goes beyond just this incident. We need to make sure everyone understands the bigger picture." I took a deep breath. It was time. "I'll be there in an hour." I hung up the phone, the finality of my decision hitting me. This was no longer just about me. It was about sending a message to everyone who had ever felt overlooked, judged, or mistreated. It was about standing up and refusing to let things slide anymore. I grabbed my jacket, made sure my uniform was in place, and headed out the door. As I drove toward the station, I could feel the weight of the moment settle over me. Today would be the day I made my stand clear. It wasn't just about exposing a wrong, it was about changing the way people thought, the way they treated each other. And I wasn't backing down. When I arrived at the station, the atmosphere was tense, thick with an air of uncertainty. There was a palpable sense of urgency in the air, as if everyone knew that the eyes of the world were upon them. The hallways were unusually quiet, except for the occasional hurried shuffle of officers walking briskly past, too caught up in their own thoughts to even acknowledge me. I took a deep breath as I walked through the doors, the heavy weight of the situation pressing on my chest. I was here for more than just a statement. I was here to make sure that what had happened to me wasn't swept under the rug. No matter how hard they tried to reframe the narrative, it wasn't just an isolated incident. This was part of something bigger, something that needed to be addressed. My supervisor was waiting for me in a small, stark room at the back of the building. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered slightly, casting a cold glow over the room. He stood up when I entered, his expression serious, but there was a hint of gratitude behind his eyes. "You ready?" he asked, motioning toward the seat at the table. I nodded, pulling my jacket tighter around me. "Let's get this over with." We spent the next hour going over the details of the situation, and every time I retold the story, it felt more surreal. The officers' actions, the way they immediately assumed I was someone else, the way they tried to intimidate me, it was like reliving it all over again. But I wasn't just telling my side anymore. I was making sure that people would understand what it meant, what it felt like, to be treated this way without justification. Once the statement was complete, my supervisor nodded, his expression more focused than before. "You've done more than just tell your story," he said. "You've set the stage for a bigger conversation. This isn't just about what happened yesterday. It's about accountability. We can't afford to let things like this continue." I stood up, feeling the weight of his words settle in. "What happens now?" "Now," he said, "we take this up the chain. We need to make sure the department doesn't just give lip service to this. We need action. We're going to make sure there's a real investigation, and that those officers face the consequences of their actions." As we left the room, a few other officers passed by, their gazes quickly shifting away when they saw me. They knew the tension in the air wasn't just about a pair of officers anymore, it was about change, and that change was coming faster than anyone could have anticipated. Walking out of the station, I felt like I was leaving something behind, a past I could never return to. The world was watching, and for once, I knew that the conversation was changing. The next few days felt like a blur. The media coverage intensified, but so did the public outcry. Stories poured in from people who had experienced similar situations, stories of being misjudged, mistreated, or ignored simply because of their appearance. It wasn't just a story about two officers anymore, it was about a larger problem, a systemic issue that needed to be addressed. And now, people were finally listening. The investigation into the officers continued, but the pressure on the department grew. Protests, small but powerful, began to form outside precincts. Social media campaigns picked up steam, calling for accountability and better training for law enforcement. People from all walks of life rallied around the cause, and there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. I stayed out of the spotlight as much as I could, but I knew that my actions had sparked something bigger. I had done what I needed to do, stood firm, told my story, and made sure the world knew the truth. But I wasn't about to stop there. I knew the fight for real change wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Then came the day when the results of the investigation were announced. The officers in question were officially suspended pending further review. Their actions had been deemed inappropriate, and their conduct had been flagged as unacceptable. It wasn't a full-blown dismissal, yet, but it was a start. It was proof that the system was willing to hold itself accountable when pushed hard enough. And that meant something. I received a call from my supervisor that afternoon. The department is moving forward with a new initiative for better cultural competency training for all officers, he said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. It's a small step, but it's something we've needed for a long time. You've helped make that happen. I didn't know what to say at first. It wasn't about recognition for me, it was about knowing that things were starting to change. I had done my part, but the real work was just beginning. As the days turned into weeks, the noise around the incident began to die down. The officers involved were quietly removed from active duty, facing the consequences of their actions. But in the silence that followed, I knew that the conversation had already shifted. People were more aware, more vocal, and more determined to hold those in power accountable. In the end, what started as an ordinary day at a gas station turned into something far greater. It wasn't just about one confrontation, it was about creating a ripple effect that would change the way law enforcement interacted with people. A single phone call had, in many ways, ended their careers, but it had also opened the door to something much more important, the possibility of real, lasting change. And that, more than anything else, was my victory.